Okay, so we are recording. Nice. So I'm gonna go ahead and start my presentation. Everybody can see that? Yes. Okay, awesome. So this is me. Again, you guys have seen my wonderful face and this picture a million times if you've come to the trainings this week. So yours truly, my name is Sam. I'm the ENTV director here at ENTV at EO Media, and I'm so excited to be teaching this course, which is basically everything you need to know about camera equipment, how in the world this thing works. There's a lot of parts to this, you know, like we've got the lens, we've got the actual body, there's different types of cameras, how to work within, you know, your tripod, your camera, your microphone, and making everything and sound in sync, and then, you know, everything work together the way that you want it to work. And obviously, artistically in the future, you think of getting a picture and you get exactly what you want. So that's what we want to strive for, understanding your camera. So it's almost like an extension of you, you know? A lot of people say that when they hop into cars, they're like driving and then they become the car, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, it's kind of that we want to reach that point where we know the machine so well that we can change it and manipulate it to what we want it to be in the end. So this is some of my work. I personally shoot Nikon D5600. It's an APS-C sensor, so it's not that big, but this is some of the stuff that I've done. Definitely I've grown as an artist, and like if I look back in a year to now, like definitely things have changed. You know, I've learned so much, and that's kind of like the learning process that everybody has to go through. If you guys can see, like this is kind of like my most recent work, and this was my work from last year. So it's a big step up, and I think a lot of you guys, the more you shoot, the better you get. So that's just kind of the thing that we want to learn. But like, how do we do all this stuff? How do we learn? Get all of this knowledge, because a lot of people have to basically go out and then try to find that information. So this is a basic explanation on how to do everything. So cameras explained. So I just want to go briefly on everybody here. How comfortable are you guys with cameras? How comfortable are you guys with equipment? We can start with Tiffany.
So I've tried using like a Nikon camera before, and like I did struggle a lot with it at first, but like I slowly got better, but like now I just completely stopped, so I'm a little scared to try to like
Right,
go back again and like start practicing all over. I hope I don't forget as many things now, but yeah. So I'm like okay.
Okay, all right. That's good though, because then you're gonna be able to learn a lot from this, and that's kind of the point, you know. So you guys get to absorb all this knowledge and then put it to practice. All right, Ian, how about you?
I mean, during high school, I did a lot of like on-camera work. So there were only a few times where I was actually responsible for camera equipment. So like my knowledge is very, very low, but like manageable.
Okay, all right, that's good. Michelle, how about you?
I have so much time. I know use the video camera. I use when I see more children. I like to take videos the parties and with my family. But I have so much time. I stop. But I want to continue because I want to working with this in my future, and I want to continue learning about it because I have some. I want to learning about it, the cameras and all production and all behind the
Right, definitely. Awesome. So how about you, Tori? How do you feel about cameras?
I'm kind of comfortable with them, like similar to Ian. Like I was like in TV production in high school, and I was more like 50-50 both behind and in front of the camera, so like I got to know like the cameras we use at my school kind of well, but like I'm sure like Sarah kind of gave me a rundown of how to like set the cameras here and like all the different kind of like the basic stuff last night when I started to help shoot. But I really don't know a whole lot.
Right. Okay, so that's kind of the point.
Everybody, you know, I'm gonna switch my audio to my computer so I can hear everybody a little bit better. But that's kind of the point where everybody, you know, you come in and then you have that certain step, and then basically as time passes by, you get to learn all this stuff. So everything that I put in this PowerPoint, I only really learned about like a couple of years ago. So as soon as you start learning that and start understanding how the camera works, it's going to be a lot easier for you to learn how to manage it and then figure out how you want your pictures to look like. So we're going to go a little bit more in depth with this. As you guys know, there are 3 different kinds of cameras. So if you guys look at this, you're like, oh my gosh, you know, like what's the difference? You know, there's a difference between all these cameras. Well, yeah, there are different types of cameras. So for example, right here, yes, there are different types of cameras. This one right here is a DSLR, which is the ones that we use in the newsroom. Basically, a DSLR uses a sensor. So if I open the camera up, I detach the lens from the camera. There's a sensor inside that basically flips between this. It's a lot more mechanical than different types of lenses. For example, this one in the bottom hand corner, top hand corner, sorry. The mirrorless camera basically doesn't have a sensor that flips. So it just basically gets light and brings it to the center of the camera, which is basically like the sensitive part of the camera that gets in all that light and then translate it into a picture. And then film camera, obviously, like that works a lot different because it uses reels instead. So different types of cameras for different types of purposes. Digital cameras, which is your digital SLR cameras, we use them in the newsroom, and it's what I'm going to start going in depth of because it's what we use here. Mirrorless and film cameras are a little bit more advanced, and if you guys are interested in doing something like that, then definitely go ahead and check those out. But mostly this class, we're going to be talking about DSLR cameras. So I'm going to be going over the different types of cameras, which I've already talked about a little bit. The different parts of a camera, because as you can see, there are different parts of it. There is like the actual lens that can, you know, you can take this lens off and it comes apart, and then you have the actual body of it, and then it comes with like a lens, it comes with like the viewfinder and all that stuff. So we're going to be going over, oh my gosh, if I can find how to match this up, we're going to be going over all the different types, the parts inside of the camera, and we're going to talk about the settings of a camera so you guys can understand how that works. And we're going to have fun while we talk about it, so everybody's going to, you know, get a little bit of more knowledge. So right here, one of the most important parts of a camera is ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. Do you guys have any idea of what those 3 things are, if you guys know? Okay.
Shutter speed, how fast like the picture's taken.
Okay, awesome. So you guys have a little bit of knowledge. All right, so I'm gonna show you guys all the different parts. And this is so exciting because you guys can change this and then change how the actual thing works. So first off, aperture. As you guys know, I've been going over different types of a camera. This part inside of the lens, if I open up the lens, inside of this area, there are basically discs that open and close. So the more closed it is, the less light is being allowed inside. And the more open it is, the more light is being allowed inside of the camera. So basically, in this part of the camera, you guys can see that there's like a little hole in there. Basically, that's how big your aperture is. So right now it's pretty closed. But if I change the settings on this and I open it up closer, more light is going to be allowed inside of the camera. So that's basically your aperture, and that changes a lot of the things. So if you have the actual like aperture or f-stop, also it's called f-stop also, if you have it more open, more light is going to be allowed in, and then closed is going to be less light allowed in. And that also changes your like the blur that is in the camera. So let's say that I have f-stop of 1 point, let me see if I can change I see all of your lovely faces. I need to take you off the screen. Your f-stop of 1.4, which is on the right side, it means that there's going to be one item in focus. So the more open it is, it's also going to show like what's in focus as well. So there's only going to be one thing in focus. So if I have that setting on and then I'm shooting like this computer right here, only like the screen would show up. Whereas if I have the aperture more closed, if I have the aperture more closed, so like f-stop 16 right there, everything's gonna be in focus as well. So I would have like my computer, I would have the computer behind, I'd have the background, so everything would be in focus as well, and it would be darker. So that's basically the shutter inside of the camera, the aperture. So for example, here's some examples of what I'm going to show you. So f-stop of 2.8. Obviously, these are more darker. These are darker as like f2.8, f8, f16, and f32. They're more dark, but they showed it in the same light, so you guys understand blurriness. So f-stop of 2.8, it only really shows those little parts of the lily pad, whereas in f-stop 32, it shows like all of that in focus. So that helps with stylistic choices when you want to shoot somebody and then kind of like redirect the focus from that person to somebody in the background. If you have like an f-stop that's slower, or if you have an f-stop that is higher and you want to show everything on screen, you can do that too. So it changes the focus on your camera and it changes the light on your camera. Basically, ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, they all change how light works, but they all have different ways of doing it. So f-stop changes how your light works between like small and little, and also changes your blur. So this is what I was talking to you guys about, which is basically like what I showed you guys here, but you can't really see it. Here are the little blades that show up. So for example, on the right one, an 8-blade aperture, it closes and opens, changing on that. And also the amount of blades that you have changes like the background, so you guys can see how blurry that is. So you have like little circles in the background that is changed by the amount of blades that you have. Or on the left one, there are 5 blades, so it's more like hexagonal kind of, so the bokeh are not, the background is not as circular, so it's like a little bit less circular in the blur. So now we're going to talk about shutter speed. So we already talked about basically this part of the camera inside there. So we're going to talk about shutter speed, which is actually not on the lens, but it's on that area inside of the camera, which is right in front of the sensor. So shutter speed basically changes how, like, I don't want to say blurry, but like how fast the camera is taking the picture. So it can appear, like for example, on the very bottom right hand corner, like that subject is a little bit like there's, movement going around, and whereas like that first one in the top left hand corner, it's more crisp. So it's how fast the camera is going to grab that picture. So if it grabs a picture really, really, really fast, it's obviously going to get that one moment in time. So if it only gets that one moment in time, it only gets a little bit of light. But if you get like, it leaves it open and then grabs that picture, it's going to grab basically everything that's happening. So a lot more movement is happening, and it's also absorbing more and more light. So as soon as it finishes grabbing all of that, there's going to be more movement and there's going to be more light. So that picture is going to be lighter, which is the bottom right hand. So basically all of these numbers that's happening right now, right here in these boxes, is of a second. So this first top left one, it's 1 frame of 500 seconds. So 1 of 500 seconds. And the bottom right hand is half. So only 1 of half a second. So that's why it shows you, like, that's basically time. So it'd be choo, choo. Whereas this one would be, so it's a lot faster and the bottom is slower. So this is a little bit of a video that I found really, really important when I first started understanding what shutter speed was. It shows you sensor and then how it's connected to shutter speed. So I'm going to show you guys that video. And I
didn't get that. Could you try again? Epic adventure is closer than you think. Discover a dinosaur filled.
We love dinosaurs. Can you guys hear The video? Yeah, awesome. Okay. 2 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and put this at 2 minutes.
1/8,000th of a second, which looks like this. So now what we'll do is we'll use the phantom to film different shutter speeds of the camera and see how they all compare to each other in slow motion. Honestly, these are probably going to look identical in real time, but we'll definitely be able to see the difference in slow-mo. So we'll start with a 500th of a second.
So basically, the shutter opens and closes.
1,000th of a second.
That right there is the shutter
A
speed.
2,000th of a second. 4,000th of a second. And an 8,000th of a second.
So as you guys can see, basically what is shown there is that when there's, for example, half a second, the shutter speed was like more open and it allowed more light and it was slower in kind of grabbing that. But in 1,000s, which is 10,000s frame per second, it only got a little smidge of it. So it only grabbed a little bit of light. So I'm gonna play that one more time so that you guys can see that happen again.
Honestly, these are probably going to look identical in real time, but we'll definitely be able to see the difference in slow-mo. So we'll start with a 500th of a second.
See, it's a lot bigger.
1,000th of a second. A 2,000th of a second. 4,000th of a second.
So that's basically the idea of shutter speed. It's how fast the camera is gonna want to take that picture. I'm gonna change my. Oh, I'm gonna change to back to my presentation. Oh, where's my presentation? Right here. Okay. So that's basically how shutter speed works. So every DSLR has that kind of area inside here. So when it takes a picture, it will open up and close. So depending on how fast you want it to open and close, it will change light and it'll also change the movement going on in your picture. So for example, this one right here, they're changed so that you can, they're like the same light, so you could see differences and stuff like that. It's edited, but for example, this one, top left, it's very blurry. So basically the camera opened up the sensor, exposed the sensor for 1 second, took it, so a lot of motion is happening. And that 1/160th of a second, it opens up and takes it really, really fast, so you grab that one moment in time. So it's gonna be darker, whereas a 1 second is gonna open up and close it. So that's an example of a really slow shutter speed. That's an example of a really fast shutter speed because it grabbed that moment in time. And you could see the little dude standing there and taking the picture. Now we're going to talk about ISO. So ISO, as I talked about, every single one changes how light looks. ISO basically is artificial light. So you can add light to your video or picture, but it's going to be totally artificial. So the more ISO you add, the more grainy it's going to look because it's not real light. It's basically added to your camera. So this is, again, edited so you guys can see the differences, the side effects of ISO. ISO 100 in the top left, it's a lot more, it doesn't look grainy at all. But as soon as you start adding more and more ISO into your video or a picture, it looks more grainy. It almost looks like it's snowing in the top right. So that's how ISO can impact your picture. So right here is an ISO, f-stop, and aperture, everything that we talked about. So in that top line right there, you guys can see your f-stop is changing the blurriness because it's talking about how big the camera, the blades are. So in the right hand, you guys can see it's more blurry in the background, whereas in the left, everything is in focus because there's 16 points in focus, and then on right one, there's only one really point in focus. That middle line right there is talking about shutter speed. So how fast it's going to take that moving object. So in the left-hand side, it's a lot more crisp. So even though that guy is still moving his hammer in the same speed, it's going to take that one moment in time. And in the right-hand corner, it's a lot more like blurry. So it's taking a lot of movement. And then the bottom line, ISO, it's a lot more grainy and less grainy, but they all impact light. So we're also going to talk about sensor size. So this is talking a little bit more about resolution. By the way, do you guys have any questions talking about ISO, shutter speed, aperture that you guys have? No? Okay, awesome. So moving on to resolution size and sensor sizes. So a sensor is basically, as I showed you guys, like this part of the, right here, if you guys can see my picture, is basically inside of the camera. It's one of the like most important parts of the camera because it's actually taking that light in. So as you guys know, like a camera, the way it works is that it's a big mirror inside. Basically like how our eyes work, our eyes like flip images inside of our eyes and then it connects it to the head. So basically like the sensor is, let's say, like the inside of your eyeball almost. So this right here, it gets in all the information and then twists it into the sensor, and then the sensor is the one that receives all of that light and then converts it into the picture, which is your camera. So your sensor size, there are different types of sensor size. There's small sensors and big sensors. For example, this one right here is what's on the left, which is an APS-C crop sensor. It's mostly what I use too on my camera because full frame sensors are really, really, really expensive, and it's more professional. So you have like those sensors, like Netflix uses a sensor that's a little bit bigger than a full frame sensor, but the average user uses a sensor that's APS-C. For example, your actual like phone sensors is a lot smaller than an APS-C sensor, which is this. It's like tiny. It's very, very small. So it's not, you know, when you take a picture, that's why you have to use portrait mode in order to get like your like backgrounds and all that stuff, because in reality, like look at this, it's like tiny and all that stuff. So your sensor sizes are different. So here's a little quote that I like using sometimes. So the soul of the digital camera is its sensor. To determine the image size, resolution, low light performance, depth of field, dynamic range, lenses, and even the camera's physical size, the sensor is key. Your camera sensor determines how good your images look and how large you can scale them or print them. So basically, the sensor is the most important part of the camera. So that's a little bit about your sensor size. You can't really change that in your camera, but it's good to know when you're going to buy a camera, if you guys want to have that step up, or if you're looking to more professional looks and stuff like that. That's something to keep in mind. But when you actually have your camera, your ISO, shutter speed, and aperture is important to impact your actual picture. And then we have a little bit of white balance and all those settings which can change it. Basically, white balance is like how cold or warm your picture is. So changing what white is, that's basically your white balance. So if the area is kind of like warm and stuff like that, you might want to change your white balance to make it a little bit cooler and stuff like that. So that's something else that can change your pictures. So we're going to talk about this stuff. At first you look at this and you're like, what the heck is this? You know, it's a bunch of numbers, it's a bunch of letters, and you're like, I don't know what this is. And maybe you've seen this when you started editing your photos or you're taking pictures and all that stuff. So you're like, what is this? So we're going to dissect this a little bit. We're going to start with the PI part, P-I. So basically, your P-I, when you're taking pictures or you're importing your video or all that stuff, this is basically talking about video and all the stuff inside when you're taking that video. So progressive, for example, have you guys seen a movie? And who here has seen a movie? First off, I hope everybody here has seen a movie, of course. So when you guys are actually seeing the movie, yes, Tiffany, thank you for that. Yes. When you guys are actually seeing a movie, what is going on inside of your movie? You guys can see that there's like a bunch of pictures condensed really, really, really fast, and basically you're watching all of those pictures, right? There are different ways to transmit that on screen. So P basically is when you show one picture, the entire picture comes off, and then you replace it with another picture. So it's basically just going like this. And then as soon as you do that really, really fast, your video smoothens up and you have that. Interlace is a little bit different. So interlace video is by lines. So everything is going to show up at the same time, and then another line comes out and replaces it with the next one. And it basically goes like this. So that's interlaced. If you guys can see this, progressive is that one very smooth going like this, kind of like, you know, CPR. Interlace is just those lines popping up. So when you're editing a video and you're putting in your video content and start editing, you have to keep in mind progressive versus interlace. So you have 0180 HD, P or I. Make sure that you use P. Most professional companies actually use progressive when they're editing because they don't want to see those nasty lines in your screen. So now we're going to talk about the front part, which is 1080 HD. So what does that mean? Basically, that's your pixel size. So have you guys heard of 4K cameras? Cameras that can shoot up to 4K? That's basically your resolution. So it's like how big it's going to get your video. So have you guys like gotten a picture and then when you screenshot a little bit of that picture and you blow it up, you guys can see the little dots inside. And even if you get another picture inside of that screenshot, you open it up and there's a lot more pixels. That's basically what that is. So inside of this, it's 1080 pixels like this vertically. So little dots inside of that video, or yeah. And then on the bottom part, the x-axis, it's 1920 pixels. So there's pixels on that side, pixels on top. So all of that forms a lot of pixels. So if you screenshot like a picture inside of this actually, and you blow it up, there's a lot less pixels inside. So obviously, if you're taking a picture or you're taking a video or anything, it's gonna look a lot better the more pixels you have, because it blends in a little bit better. So this is 4K, and this is everything that you guys can see here. So we have VCD, DVD, 720p, 1080p, 2K, and 4K. So obviously, the one with the least resolution size, which is VCD, is not going to look as good as 4K because 4K is the bigger picture. So that's why you guys can hear everybody wants to get 4K, but obviously it's going to take a lot slower to render. It's going to take a lot slower to export, to actually upload onto YouTube and all that stuff. It takes a lot longer, but obviously it looks a lot better. So different cameras have that capability. So who uses this? Basically, television broadcasts, they use 4K, or maybe even just like, you know, everybody that changes the resolution size and stuff like that. Netflix shows like to use 4K. They use different cameras that have those different capabilities. So everybody uses these resolution sizes. It's in absolutely every single type of camera and all that stuff. So it's something interesting if you guys are trying to buy a camera and then maybe go into that professional look and have your videos look a little bit better. So we're going to talk about frames per second now. Frames per second. Do you guys have any questions about resolution size? Nope. Okay. So we're going to talk about frames per second. So this is also when you're going to shoot video. Obviously, you can't use frames per second in a picture because one picture is one frame. So the amount of frames that there is in a video changes it. So we're going to talk about frames per second, which is a big pun because I put a bunch of frames on the screen. So, for example, 30 frames per second. It only shows in that 1 second of time, 30 pictures. Let's say that you have more pictures in that 1 second, so 60 different pictures, it's gonna look a lot smoother. And so obviously 60 frames per second is gonna look like a lot smoother than 30 frames per second. In your video with 30 frames per second, like you could see like my hand moving like this, where in 60 frames per second, you could see it a lot smoother. So I'm gonna show you guys this one video, which was very helpful when I started learning all of this stuff. New share, Safari, there we go. Zoom is a little bit complicated. So if you guys can see this here, everybody can see this green block? Yes? Okay. This is 15 frames per second. So you guys can see there's a little bit of drag there. The block is moving a little bit. If I change it to 30, it starts moving a lot smoother. If I change it to 60, it moves way smoother. So there's a big difference between 15 frames per second and 60 frames per second. Now, in reality, you would think that, why would anyone in the right mind use 60 frames per second, 15 frames per second? In reality, it's a stylistic choice. So a lot of filmmakers actually use 24 frames per second. And the reason they use it is because that's what our eyes see at, our eyes naturally see at 24 frames per second, which in reality is like 23.9 something. Whereas in like 60 frames per second, people use that for sports. So they want to like slow-mo something and do like an instant replay, something like that, and they want to make it slow. You're increasing that second in time and making it longer, so you're exposing all those frames in it, so you want more frames. So if you're expanding that second, it looks a lot smoother. So it's really a stylistic choice. Most movies use 24 frames per second, but it's more like whatever you want kind of thing. So now we're going to talk about the different types of lenses. So do you guys have any questions on frames per second? Nope. Okay, awesome. So lenses, which is so much fun because this is the part where you start like endeavoring on stylistic choices. So who here has heard of, I have a 50 millimeter prime lens, and you guys are like, what the heck does millimeters mean? I know I did a couple years ago when I didn't understand any of this stuff. So basically, the millimeter is the focal length in between your actual lens and the sensor. So if you guys see this picture right here, there's this dude standing on this side, and then that little block thing is a camera. So as I said, the camera basically switches that video and then turns it in your frame, because this is a glass basically. It flips it, and then your sensor is the one that grabs that information, which is how our eyes work too. The focal length, which is your millimeters, is in between the actual side of the lens and where it hits your sensor. So the bigger the lens, the more millimeters it is, obviously, because your focal length is a lot longer. So this, for example, this camera right here, as you guys can see, this is a 18 to 55 millimeter lens. So the distance between here to the sensor is actually, it changes how long you want it to be. So this is called a zoom lens. So these zoom lenses change how big your focal length is. So it changes from 18 to 55. So there's a whole variety of lenses that you can use. It goes from like 8 millimeters, and you can go to, thousands. So right here, I'm going to show you guys. Oh, I also wanted to show you guys a little clip here. Hold on, I have to go to my Illustrator. You share Illustrator. Here we go. So I showed you guys what millimeters mean. So this is right here. If you guys can see my mouse, I hope you can see my mouse. This is a dude standing here, and then this is the camera. So this is the focal length, basically. The smaller the focal length, the more area you're going to be able to cover. So let's say that I want to shorten this up right here. My focal length is a lot smaller. So obviously, it's going to grab a higher angle, like a bigger angle right here. But instead, if I make my focal length longer, so bigger millimeters, it's only going to cover this small area, whereas if I had a smaller focal length, it's going to grab more area. So that's basically fisheye lenses. Have you guys heard of fisheye lenses? Yeah, so it grabs a lot more area. Let me see if you guys can see my screen. There we go. Play. Okay. So this is your fisheye lens. So since it's 8 millimeters long, it's very, very small between your lens and then your sensor. So since it's very small, it's going to grab that variety, that area, which is 180 degrees. So it looks very, very strange because it looks like a fisheye. So 14 millimeters, it's a little bit more compact, but it's bigger than a focal length than an actual fisheye. So it's going to grab 106 degrees. Then we start getting smaller, so 92 degrees, 84 degrees with 24, 74 degrees, 62 degrees, 46 degrees. And then if you guys can see here, there's a difference in color here. So 180 degrees is like that degree size, and then as soon as you start getting to this green, that's called a normal lens. So a normal lens is basically how our eyes see. If you guys can see 180 degrees, 8mm lens distorts how that image looks. So I'm gonna get off from my slides a little bit, and I'm gonna show you guys how a fisheye looks. Fisheye images. Here we go. Let me change. Ta-da. Okay. Oh, no. Ta-da. If you guys can see here, look at this picture. It's a little bit distorted. See, this isn't how our eyes look. It's a little bit, it's like bent almost, because you can see from one corner of the room to the other corner of the room because the focal length is a lot smaller. So, for example, this one right here, it looks like, it looks a little bit weird there. So this is basically this lens. It's a very, very compact lens. So we're gonna go back to my presentation. There we go. Share. So that's how that looks. For example, like a 50mm lens, however, it's a lot like there's 50mm from the actual lens to the sensor. So it's a lot bigger than an 8mm, and that's what's considered a normal lens because that's how our eyes see it. So how that picture is taken is how we look at things, which is why a lot of people prefer using 50mm for portraits, for headshots and stuff like that. Then we have we start getting to telephoto lenses. So 80mm, it's a lot bigger than a 50mm or an 8mm. So we start getting a lot bigger, where we start getting to 600mm. So you guys can see the more focal length there is, the narrower that camera is going to be able to take that photo, which is why a lot of photographers, if you're working at Nat Geo, National Geographic, you would want to prefer a 600mm lens, so you get that you're able to get things that are really, really, really far away, and also like that nice blurry background that you're not maybe able to get in that 8mm lens. So millimeter is that focal length. If you have a different type of cameras, there's different types of cameras. So like, for example, there's like the zoom lens, and then there's a prime lens. Hopefully I can get you guys off of my screen. There we go. So there's fixed focal lengths, so it stays the same. For example, like a 50mm lens, it stays at 50mm. You cannot zoom in. And then there are zoom lenses, which are so they're prime lenses. So for example, like 24mm and 50mm, it will be only 24mm and 50mm. So you cannot zoom in. So basically what people like to say is that you zoom in with your feet. Ranges, so like zoom lenses, you are able to zoom in. So for example, this one is an 18 to 55mm, so I can zoom in. Basically what I'm doing, that I'm changing the focal length so it's a little bit more magnified, so you can zoom in without actually having to move. This is another example of how that looks like that popped up on my Instagram feed, and I wanted to share. So 14mm is getting that area, and then 600mm is only getting that one small spot. So you're able to zoom in to that video. That's basically how zooming works. So if you guys can see here, there are different types of lenses. Normal lenses is what I use, which is the 50mm. It's a little bit of a hassle because you have to zoom in with your feet. You can't actually zoom in. But a telephoto lens, you can get that far away area. So normal lenses, people like to use in between a 50 and an 100 in order to get that portrait photo. But then like 8mm is used for landscape, really wide stuff, if you want to get like a building and stuff like that. Normal lenses, they're used for like documentary style and stuff like that, or getting pictures of people. Medium telephoto, you can zoom into stuff, so you want to get like maybe even portraits as well, or your telephoto lenses that zoom in a lot bigger. So if we see this house in the very first line is very far away and then very zoomed in as soon as we start hitting like 300 millimeters, or you have like that, you know, bottom part which is used for that kind of stuff. So we get that nice little hummingbird in the bottom corner because it's far away, and it's also, it helps you zoom into that stuff because there's something called foreground and background. So basically, if I take a photo of you guys, let's say that there are two objects right here, and I'm very, very close to these two objects, and I take a photo of them really close, they're both going to be in focus. But if I put them far away and I take a photo of this, this is going to be blurry. So depending on how far away and close you are, it changes how like blurry things are. So basically, if you're very far away and you're taking a picture of that hummingbird, the foreground is going to be in focus and the background is going to be in blur. So you can get different cameras with different types of ranges. For example, there's this one camera lens. It's called the Canon Cineservo, which is 50 to 1,000 millimeter lens with an f-stop that's, 5 to 8.9. And that has a big budget. It's a $70,000 lens. I'm going to show you guys a video of that lens. So I'm going to go back to right here, Instagram, our lovely Instagram. Take a look at how big this lens is. That's a ginormous lens with a big variety of focal lens that you can use there. So yeah, you can use a lens that's 50 millimeters, like my tiny lens, like a prime, or you can zoom it into 1,000. So, you have that variety if you want to change that there. So that's an example of, also, if you guys want to put on a tripod to your camera, use a penny. Don't break your fingers. That's a little trick. Okay, so we're going to go back to my presentation. I get lost when I'm switching between these, so I'm going to have to look for it. There we go. Okay. Okie dokie. So any questions on camera lenses and the different types of lenses that we use? None? Okay, awesome. So next up, we're going to talk about microphones. So how many of you knew that there are different types of microphones? Okay, cool. So there are different types of microphones. We use different microphones. There's a variety of them for different reasons, just like we have a variety of cameras. So sometimes we use a microphone that's going to be attached to one person, which is called a lavalier microphone. When you guys see that a lot on TV, you add the microphone here. So why do we use that instead of a microphone that's longer and then we have them, up to here? So why do we use those different things? Because different types of microphones grab audio differently. Some of them are more sensitive to 180 degrees, whereas some of them are just sensitive at 90 degrees, depending on the structure of the actual microphone. So there is this one type of microphone. It's omnidirectional because it's grabbing all of that audio. So for example, a lavalier microphone, if you add it onto your collarbone right here, or your collar of your shirt, not your collarbone, I hope, you're grabbing all of this audio that's around. So if my voice is coming into here or is coming from here, it's going to grab it equally from all different sides, which is helpful because the lavalier microphones, you can have it anywhere and then it will grab that audio. So you're not really too concerned about direction because it can be aimed anywhere, which is nice. Then you have cardioid microphones. So it has a sensitivity of the audio in the front and it's not really sensitive in the back, which is nice because sometimes you only want to get that one direction of a microphone towards you and you want to leave that unwanted noise away. You don't want that there, which is ambient noise. So it's nice to have some cardioid microphones that are just like one direction, which is different than an omnidirectional microphone like a lavalier, which is going to grab all that audio. So this is nice for if you're standing up on a stage and then you want to actually talk to a group, an audience, you won't get the chatter of people. You'll just get that one person speaking. Supercardioid microphones, it has sensitivity in the front and the back, but mostly in the back it doesn't have that pickup like the front does. So supercardioid microphones are nice when you want to get things that are in louder environments because it's not as resistant in the back, so you can get that audio in the front, but you can also get in the back, but it's not as big as the front. Then you have bidirectional microphones, which is basically like a little 8 there. If you guys see that graph, so it basically has like 90 and then 90. So people use that in different types of situations, depending on like the situation, but we don't really use those too much. So if we see all of those together, we have that circle, and then it starts splitting off into almost an 8 figure. So that's pretty helpful if you guys want to use it for different things. So if you want to do like an interview, you might use a lavalier instead of a shotgun mic, which is a little bit different. So you're like, what the heck, Sam? Why is this important? So the shotgun mics that we use here in the newsroom, you might want to show it only to one person, and it only grabs this side of the audio, and it won't grab the back end. So if you, like, for example, if this is the microphone, if you hoist the microphone like this, you won't hear me at all. But if you move it like this, you will hear me. So that's what we use in boom mics. Lavalier microphones, they're different. So you put it in your bone. You don't put it in your bone, oh my gosh. You put it in the collar of your shirt, not your collarbone. It picks up all of that audio. So this is a little video. So that's like omnidirectional microphones, and you start getting to, cardioid, supercardioid, and then figure 8. So that's just a little bit of math, if you guys were interested, because we all like math. So that's a little bit of math behind the microphone. And I always say cool, like the girl with the pearl earring or the girl with the beats, So standard filming. This is a little bit more of how you get to use that video and stuff like that. So if you're filming something, there's this thing called the 180-degree rule. If you're setting up your scenes and stuff like that, you have an imaginary line between 2 different people talking there. And basically the 180-degree rule is telling you that you can only get video from one side instead of the other side, because it might confuse the person. If there are 2 people here, and then this person's talking, and you're only seeing the left side over here and the right side of their face, if you switch it to the other side, you're almost switching the person. So a little thing to keep in mind. But yeah, this is basically everything about the basics of cameras, resolution size, lenses, sensors, and all that stuff. Basically, in conclusion, be sure to practice a lot. Make sure that you guys have that hunger still of understanding how cameras work, how microphones work, and all that stuff. And basically the biggest thing is practice makes perfect. It's very cliche, but it's really true. I've seen it in myself when I'm doing my work and I want to change it, change how things work and stuff like that. And maybe you guys would want to get into that and maybe become like, get that as a professional career. So the more you practice, the better you get. And everybody starts off pretty shaky. So don't be afraid of where you are. Just take advantage of those stages that you're at. And this is a little bit of a quote from Stanley Kubrick. He's a little bit of a crazy dude, but it's a nice quote. The best education in film is to make one. And that applies to anything. It applies to pictures, like taking pictures or filmmaking and stuff like that. The best education is actually to go ahead and try to make one. So as good as it is to understand all the knowledge of how a camera works and all this stuff, it's about what you do with it. So just make sure you keep that in mind. Understand how that works, and you can change it to your stylistic ideas and stuff like that. And mesh that together with maybe editing your photos or editing a video, and there you go. It's completely yours. So the world is your oyster. You guys can change that as much as you like. So that basically concludes all of my presentation. Do you guys have any questions on anything that I explained to you? Do you guys have any questions like personally about myself and all that stuff? Anything at all? Anything that you're dying for curiosity? Okay. Well, if you guys have any questions, you guys have my number. But yeah, that's basically everything. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about how cameras work. Did everybody at least get one thing that they understood? Yes? Okay, awesome. So we have a couple minutes left, so I just want to go around what you guys found most interesting. So, Tori, how about you? What'd you think?
I guess like just I mean like understanding like the whole different kinds of lens and then microphones. Like I guess I didn't realize how many different types of microphones there are and just like what they do and everything. I guess like it's definitely opened my eyes up a little bit to like see what possibilities you can do with all these different options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of different options in absolutely everything. So it gets a little bit intense when you want to buy equipment, which is nice if you want to do your research. So Michelle, what do you think? How about you? What impacted you the most? What do you think?
I like the camera position, the camera focus. I think possible, and the resolution, the camera. Because for do the movie, you need to do these things, the resolution, the focus of the camera, and I think I like this for see the all panorama or only one focus, and I like this part.
Right, yeah, definitely. So, yeah, that's a big part in filmmaking, just like making sure that you understand like all the resolution sizes and all that stuff. So seeing how that changes your video. So Ian, how about you? What'd you think?
Yeah, just like Tori said, with just how many different options there are with like lenses and microphones.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really realize that either.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a little bit overwhelming. But like starting off, I would definitely recommend like using an APS-C, which is what I use. You don't really need a whole lot of that professionally. So, and also the fact that some people say like don't use Nikon, don't use Canon, all that stuff. A lot of these companies are coming out with actual like cameras that match each other. So when you hear like don't use Nikon and all that stuff, like James Greco from marketing at FGCU uses a Nikon, you know what I mean? So like it definitely is like how you want, like which applies to you best. I use a Nikon, so does Julia Bonavita from Eagle Muse, so definitely up to you. Tiffany, what do you think? What impacted you the most?
The differences in microphones, like Tori said, I didn't know all of that. And then also the differences between the iOS, the Aperture, and oh my gosh, what was the other thing?
Shutter speed.
Oh, shutter speed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
So basically whenever you're changing like the shutter speed to go faster,
Mm-hmm.
you had said like there's less light that goes in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Would that mean you would like if you're in a darker place, do you have to like change the lighting before you have it faster?
That's a really good question. So if you're for example, if you're inside, you're indoors, as soon as you start understanding how all these three things work, you can change how each setting is to change your light. So if you're in a really, really, really dark place, you would probably want to have your ISO a little bit higher, your shutter speed a little bit slower, and then your aperture a little bit like as open as you possibly can. So maybe if you're indoors and the lights are out and there's only one little bit of light source, personally, how I would set my camera with like a 50 millimeters lens, I would have my f-stop be like 1.8. My shutter speed, I'd probably set it to like maybe like 100, and then my ISO, I'd probably have it at like 600, 700, and that would balance up to make it look good, but at the same time not bad, not like messed up or anything, because I don't want to have my ISO too big because it's grainy and all that stuff. So you would want to change how your shutter speed works in all those different situations as much so that they balance off on each other. Or if you're outside and it's really, really light outside, there's also different types of filters that you can add to your camera. So for example, I use a filter. There's like a UV filter and then an ND filter, which is a neutral density filter, is basically like a manual opacity that you add on top of your camera. So you add that on there and then it changes it to make it darker so you can not change your settings on your camera. But if you didn't have that neutral density filter, I would probably have mine set to like my shutter speed is a lot faster, so it grabs a little bit of light. ISO a lot lower, and your aperture, I'd probably leave it like pretty open, maybe in the 2s and stuff like that, because if you change off those 2 settings, you can prioritize your f-stop. So your f-stop you want to keep it as open as you can because it looks nice blurry, which is nice because if you want to keep your f-stop like really, really big and open and have that blur, you can add a neutral density filter to make it like darker. If you have a medium setting, it really depends on where you're at. Just like the normal ones, maybe your f-stop at 1.8, your shutter speed, you maybe want to keep it at like, depends on what you're shooting. If you want to keep it like sportsy and stuff like that, it really depends. But if it's really dark outside or really loud outside, those are probably the things you want to take. If that answers your question, it's a little bit more depth. Okay, so Jakira, how about you? What'd you think?
I would say definitely the microphones, because like coming from high school, like we used to use Nikons, and like that literally became an everyday thing that I use because I don't really prefer on camera. I prefer behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So like I knew majority of the other stuff, but like the microphones, that would have been helpful like back then, because it'd be like, okay, I'm trying to use a shotgun mic, and then like there's like 50 people standing around me, so I'm like,
Right.
wow, this isn't the right mic to use.
Right, yeah. Definitely
That
check
was
that
really
your mic is on, by the way. I didn't go over that, but check that your mic is on. That will save you. And also, like, what I do is that whenever I'm going out to film stuff, I have my microphone on, but I also have my phone on just in case, because anything can go wrong. Even if you think it's on, maybe the batteries ran out, or maybe your sensitivity of your microphone was like, whew, it was at 10. Oh, I didn't go over this, but microphones have sensitivity. So if you keep it at 1, it's only going to pick up a little bit of sound. If you keep it at 10, it's going to sound overmodulated, which is like, anyway. I like to keep my phone also recording just in case, because it's nice to have a little bit of crappy sound than have nothing. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about that. But it is 1 p.m., so I'll let you guys go. But if you guys have any questions, let me know. And other than that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.